When Ellie moved into the apartment, it seemed perfect, a cozy, quiet place to start fresh. She'd just gotten out of a difficult relationship, and the last thing she wanted was a complicated living situation. The apartment was small, tucked away on the second floor of a century-old building. The landlord had warned her that it had its quirks, creaky floors, pipes that groaned, but Ellie didn't mind. It was affordable, and she liked the privacy. The first night was peaceful, save for the occasional creak of the old building settling. But by the second night, Ellie noticed something strange. It started with a faint noise, a soft, scraping sound, almost like fingernails on wood. She sat up in bed, staring into the dark, her heart thumping in her chest. The sound came from under the bed. She told herself it was just the building, the pipes, anything but that. She tried to ignore it and pulled the covers over her head, hoping to drown it out. But the scraping continued. It wasn't random either. It was deliberate, like something was trying to move, or worse, waiting. Ellie threw the covers off and stood up, trying to shake off the cold sweat that had settled on her skin. The noise stopped, and the silence felt heavier than it should have. She crouched down, heart hammering, and peered under the bed. There was nothing there, just dust and shadows. She let out a sigh of relief, stood up, and brushed herself off. But then the scraping started again, only this time it was different. It was quicker, frantic, like something was scratching at the underside of the bed, desperate to get out. Ellie's stomach churned. She backed away from the bed, her breath quickening. The scraping stopped. Suddenly the apartment felt too small, too close. Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She tried to sleep, but every time her eyes fluttered shut, she could feel the weight of something in the room with her. Something wrong. She stared at the ceiling, the faint glow of the street lamp casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. Around 3 a.m., the scraping started again. This time it was louder. The sound wasn't from under the bed anymore. It was coming from inside the bed itself, like something was dragging itself across the mattress, beneath the fabric. Ellie's blood turned to ice. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, but before she could pick it up, something soft and heavy brushed against her feet. It was wet, cold, like skin. She froze, too terrified to move. A whisper echoed through the darkness, just a breath on her ear, but it was enough to make her skin crawl. "Help me." Ellie jumped out of bed, knocking the phone to the floor, but as she backed away, she realized with growing horror that the room had gotten colder. The temperature had dropped so quickly it hurt to breathe. Her vision clouded with condensation as she gasped for air. Then the voice came again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was louder, louder than her heartbeat, louder than her own breath. "Help me." Ellie turned around, her eyes wide with terror. She scanned the room, but there was no one, no shadow, no figure, just the oppressive dark. And then she looked down. The floor beneath her feet was no longer solid. It was moving. From under the bed, something was crawling up, its long skeletal fingers brushing against the carpet, pulling itself slowly toward her. Ellie screamed, stumbling backward, her legs hitting the wall behind her. She tried to scramble for the door, but the thing under the bed wasn't letting her go. The shadows on the floor writhed and shifted, forming into something grotesque, a face with empty, hollow eyes, stretched and pulled wide in a grotesque grin. "You shouldn't have looked." Ellie tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The thing's hand reached up from beneath the bed, its nails long and curved like talons. It grabbed her ankle, its grip freezing, sending a shock of terror through her body. With one final desperate scream, Ellie yanked herself free. She slammed the door open, stumbling into the hallway. But when she turned back, she saw the thing crawling out from under the bed, its face twisted, its body moving in unnatural, jerking motions. It stopped at the door and stared at her, through the crack in the door, its black, empty eyes burning into hers. "I'm coming." Ellie's body shook uncontrollably, her chest tight with fear. She ran down the stairs, out into the street, but the nightmare followed her, its voice echoing in her mind, its image burned into her eyes. The next day, when the landlord found her standing outside, trembling, he asked her what had happened. But Ellie couldn't speak. All she could hear was that scratching sound, and the whisper, "Help me." The apartment stood empty for weeks, until another tenant moved in. They didn't last long. The scraping, they said, started on the first night.